Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a release that has absolutely taken over the gaming conversation, Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. If you've been anywhere near the community lately, you know things are completely polarized. On one side, fans are mesmerized. They are so happy to be back in the zone. But on the flip side, we've got a really loud, frustrated group pointing out some glaring technical issues and weird design choices. So we're going to break down exactly what's going on, what the game actually nails, where it struggles, and how literally 20 years of warped expectations are fueling a massive chunk of this debate.
Right off the bat, to understand this divide, we have to look at the positive side. One player online summed it up perfectly, saying, Stalker 2 in its current state is very good. And honestly, they're definitely not alone in that. A lot of folks coming fresh off the original trilogy, games like Shadow of Chernobyl, feel like this is a super faithful sequel. The atmosphere, it's all there. The tension, absolutely there. It perfectly captures that very specific nostalgic dread that made the franchise famous all those years ago.
But man, we immediately have to contrast that with the harsh reality a lot of other people are facing. Another user fired back with, "No, it was horrible at release. You couldn't even finish the game because the main story was bugged." And wow, doesn't that just brilliantly capture how divided things are right out of the gate? Some players are getting lost in this beautifully updated classic, while others are literally hitting brick walls, game-breaking bugs that just halt their progression entirely. It is very much a tale of two completely different launch experiences.
Section 1. The Mod Expectation Clash.
So, beyond the bugs, there's actually a massive identity crisis driving this whole debate, and it stems from nearly 2 decades of hardcore community modding. We've kind of got to compare the original vision from the developers, GSC Game World, with what the community has been building all these years. Think about the vanilla original games. Yes, they were challenging, atmospheric survival shooters, but they were still very heavily narrative-driven. Now, look at what the community created over 20 years with mega mods like Gamma and Anomaly. They transform the experience into a brutally punishing, hardcore military simulation survival sandbox. You're suddenly managing complex hunger and sleep systems and breaking down intricate weapon maintenance just to survive a quick walk down the road.
And this brings us to a really crucial observation from the community. Somebody pointed out, Stalker was never a super hardcore milsim type game like Tarkov, and it was never intended to be. This hits the nail on the head. A huge chunk of today's player base actually never touched the original 2007 game. They only played those hardcore mods. So over time, they kind of warped their own memories, expecting Stalker 2 to be a direct sequel to the Gamma mod. But it's not. It's a direct sequel to the vanilla games. They went in expecting a hardcore sandbox, and instead they got a cinematic, story-driven shooter.
Section 2. What the game gets right.
Setting all those expectations aside for a second, what does Stalker 2 actually get right as a direct sequel? Well, quite a bit for sure. First up, the atmosphere. It is universally praised. It's phenomenal. Visually and sonically, it just completely nails the haunting beauty of the zone. Then there's the sheer volume of content, which is honestly staggering. People are pointing out that a critically acclaimed game like Resident Evil 9 might give you a really polished 10-hour run, right? But Stalker 2 is dropping dozens and dozens of hours of exploration and story in just its first half. And finally, the weapons. The 3D models, the handling, the punchy feel of the guns, it is a massive leap forward, and it feels so satisfying to play. Section 3. Navigating current pain points. Okay, but as much as we can praise the atmosphere and the gunplay, there are some very real, objective flaws here that go way beyond just mismatched modding expectations. First on the list is A-Life. For those who don't know, A-Life is the franchise's legendary dynamic AI system. Back in the day, this system controlled mutants and NPCs all across the map. They would interact, fight, and migrate completely independently of the player. It made the world feel incredibly alive. But in Stalker 2, players are really disappointed, because A-Life feels heavily downgraded. Instead of this living, breathing ecosystem, people are saying it feels more like a rigid event director that just artificially spawns things around you.
And that leads to some incredibly frustrating moments. Players are sharing stories of enemies literally spawning directly on top of them, out of thin air. Or they'll wander into an area like the garbage and suddenly find absurd swarms of high-level mutants like burrs or bloodsuckers spawning in every 2 minutes. It completely shatters the immersion. It forces you out of that cool survival mindset, and honestly, it's pushing some people to just turn on God mode so they can go sightseeing without being endlessly swarmed. Which brings us to another huge pain point, the incredibly tedious side mission structure. In a game that is practically begging you to explore its open world, the current gameplay loop is a bit absurd. Check this out. You talk to a bartender, and you get exactly one side job.
Okay, fine. You walk out, you hunt a mutant, you come back. But if you want another job, you literally have to sleep for 72 in-game hours just to reset the vendor. It's a completely unstackable system that totally stalls your ability to organically explore and make money.
And speaking of making money, the weapon economy is kind of broken right now. The progression just feels backward. Players are realizing that early game starting weapons completely outclass the rare guns you find late in the game. Imagine grinding to unlock a highly anticipated rifle like the AR-416, only to find out its stats are worse than your starter gun. Oh, and you can't even find the 5.56 ammo needed to shoot it until way later in the game. It just fundamentally breaks the reward cycle you expect in an RPG shooter.
Add to all of that a whole rapid-fire list of technical glitches. We don't want to get totally bogged down in negativity, but we have to mention the heavy hitters. We're talking about a shockingly short 100-meter render distance for NPCs in this massive open world. We've got bandits and mutants accurately attacking players through solid walls, and visually, while the game is gorgeous, it's suffering from some really rigid anti-aliasing and smearing lighting effects that can be pretty harsh on the eyes.
Finally, there is the frankly bizarre survival balancing. The zone is supposed to be this harsh, unforgiving wasteland where resources are incredibly scarce, right? But players are pointing out how ridiculous it is to walk up to a random wooden box, smack it with a knife, and watch a dozen sausages and canned foods magically pop out. It's kind of funny, but it leaves players constantly overloaded with food, which completely undermines the tension of surviving in a desolate, radioactive wasteland.
Section 4. Community-driven solutions.
So how do we fix all this? Well, the Stalker community is incredibly dedicated, and they are already mapping out real, actionable solutions to bridge the gap between the game's launch state and its legendary reputation. First up, let players stack open-world jobs. Let us grab 5 bounties at once and go on a grand expedition, instead of making us sleep for 3 days after every single fetch quest. Second, just bring back the binoculars for scouting. It was a staple of the original games, and it is sorely missed. And third, they really need to rebalance the master difficulty. Right now, turning the difficulty up just turns enemies into unrealistic bullet sponges while artificially nerfing the player's weapons. Because ultimately, it all comes back to what one player highlighted so perfectly. Stalker is strongest when you are free roaming the zone. The cinematic missions are great, they really are, but the community is practically begging the developers to focus on enriching that random, dynamic, open-world busywork that made the original so infinitely replayable. Give players a reason to just exist in the zone. Let us hunt artifacts and take odd jobs without being dragged down by arbitrary pacing mechanics.
Which leaves us with a really provocative thought to wrap up on today. GSC Game World has promised that official mod support is coming. Now, considering that mods are exactly what transformed the original trilogy into the hardcore survival experience that modern fans fell in love with, the real question is this. Once the community finally gets their hands on the source code, will Stalker 2 evolve into the hardcore game everyone expected all along? It is a fascinating waiting game, and we are going to be watching it very closely. Thanks so much for exploring this with me today, and keep your eyes peeled for what the zone mutates into next.